Hey, Ozzy here again at the PhotAmateur, and in this video we're going to be taking an overview of lenses. Now, camera lenses come in a vast array of types and specifications, and whole books have been written just on this subject. Now, we're not going to do any more than scrape the surface here. This is definitely not meant to be a highly technical series of videos. It's just to give you enough of the basics so that when we get to the cool stuff, the actually taking photos, you know enough to understand a little of what's happening inside of your camera. If you do want to know more about photographic lenses, there is loads of information readily available on the internet. So, what is a lens's main purpose? It is simply to focus rays of light so they form a coherent image on the plane of the film. And that's it. But there are so many ways that we, as photographers, want that to happen, and lenses have been created to do just that. There are times when we want to get a lot in the shot. Just think of those photos at a wedding when the photographer is asking everyone to bunch up close and probably act a lot friendlier than they're feeling towards a bunch of folks they never met before. That's when a wide-angle lens comes in handy. And at the other end of the scale, there's something in the far, far distance that you'd really like to see in close-up. Well, that's when a long telephoto lens comes into its own. And there are all the points in between. Let's take a quick look at one or two lenses. When we describe a camera lens, what we're typically talking about is a plastic or metal tube which contains several glass lenses, both concave and convex, that are mounted in different groups. Like I say, if you really want to get a thorough understanding of optics and exactly how the lenses on your camera work, you'll find loads of technical info on the web. We're just going to cover the need-to-know stuff here. Okay, so let's take a closer look at these lenses. These two cameras are fixed with fixed focal length lenses, often known as prime lenses. This one is a 50mm lens. Lenses between 40 and 55mm are sometimes described as normal lenses, as they provide an angle of view that most closely represents that seen by the human eye. Now, I just want to dwell on that for a minute or two so we're clear on what I mean by that. The human eye typically picks up an angle of view greater than 180 degrees. I know, it seems incredible, but we can actually see things a little way behind us. Here, I'll prove it to you. Look straight ahead and stretch your arms out either side. Now, move your arms back until you're no longer aware of them in your peripheral vision. See, that's about there for me. Now, a 50mm lens won't do that, but it will pick up about 45 to 50 degrees, which is the angle at which we are most aware without being absolutely pin-sharp focused on. And it does that without distortion, the distortion we see in lenses of either very short or very long focal lengths. And while we're talking of focal lengths, I said this is a 50mm lens, and typically you'll see the focal length of the lens along with some other info printed on the barrel of the lens. We'll look at what all the other info means in later videos, but here's where it gives us the focal length on this lens. That 50mm is the measurement of the distance from the lens to the film plate. Do you remember we saw that in the earlier video? The longer that distance, the narrower the angle of view and the nearer the viewed object will appear. This lens is a 135mm prime lens. It has a narrower field of view, but it's not what we might think of as a long lens. I like to use it for portraits as it gives an intimate feel without having to crowd the subject. This third lens is a zoom lens. Unlike the other two, its focal length is not fixed, and it can zoom from 28mm at the wide angle, wide end of its range, to 200mm at the telephoto end. And this brings us to what you will see will become a recurring theme in your photography: compromise. it's usually accepted that prime lenses such as these two will give a better, sharper image than their cousin here, the zoom lens. That's because all the elements within a prime lens have been specifically designed for the optimum performance at their fixed focal length, whereas the zoom lens has to perform reasonably well at any point along the scale between 28mm and 200mm. So, if we know the zoom lens isn't going to give as good a result at 50mm or 135mm as these two, why would we buy it? Well, I know I can go out with just this one lens in my bag and know that for most circumstances I should be able to get a reasonable image. I'm compromising a little in image quality in exchange for increased convenience and a substantial saving in expense. If I wanted to have prime lens quality on all my images, I'd probably have to invest in half a dozen lenses to cover the full range of this one zoom, and a personal trainer to get me into shape so I could carry them all. Having said that, I'll occasionally set myself a challenge and go out with just this camera, which has a fixed 42mm lens, and that's it. Can't change it. You'll be surprised at how creative you can become and at the results you can get if the only way of zooming in and out you have available to you is to use your own 2 feet. The longer you enjoy your photography, the more you'll come to realise there's typically no right or wrong answer to any question. Just a compromise position that best suits your needs at that particular time. In the next video, we're going to talk about a little about another aspect of photography that requires compromise: exposure. And we're going to look at aperture versus shutter speed and introduce ISO. I'll see you then.